Okay, we are live. Okay, so hi everybody, this is Jim over here with Church Windows. I'm going to be leading our webinar here today, our online webinar today. Uh, and what's the topic you might ask? I'm glad you asked. We're going to be talking about the grid in the membership module. And we're going to be talking about using the grid as a reporting tool as well as a data entry tool today. A lot of folks don't even know it is there who use the membership module. Um, but in my opinion, people who know how to work with the grid most efficiently are the folks who are best at the membership module, get the most out of that program. So it is a pretty big topic, and we only have about 20 minutes today to talk about it. So we will get through as much as we possibly can here today. Again, my name is Jim. I am joined online today by Josh, who will be answering any questions that you guys may have as we go through our topic here today. And speaking of questions, let's talk about your GoToWebinar control panel that you should have on your screen right now. That GoToWebinar control panel, most importantly, has a little red button in the upper left-hand corner, usually, with a white arrow on it that allows you to either minimize or maximize that control panel. You can minimize it to give yourself a little more room to see about the stuff we're talking about here in our webinar today, or you can maximize it to give yourself access to the tools there, including that questions bar. So we're going to be going through here as quickly as we can, as efficiently as we can for the next 20 minutes talking about this grid. After that point, I'm going to leave the webinar open for a little while after that. For folks who have learned everything they need to, you can feel free to leave at that time. Other than that, we'll kind of hit on any points that people might have questions in general about the topic. One other thing I do want to point out is that if you have any of our Church Windows version 18 regional training workbooks, the topic of the fine grid in that training workbook is in the M102, the membership 102 workbook, and in that workbook it really starts on page 9 and goes through all the way to the end of the book, so all the way up to page like 30 or so. So that is where that can be located in the books. So with all of that in place, I think it is time we go ahead and get started talking about that find grid. Let's go ahead and open up the membership module. Once you're here in the membership module, since we're looking at this window, this is the best opportunity for me to let you guys know that. You'll notice we've got our members button, which is one database where people are located in the membership module. And there's a second one called visitors, which is right here. When you're working with the grid and you're doing your finds, which we'll be talking about, keep in mind that if you're in the members file, you're only looking at folks from members. If you're in the visitors file, you're only looking at folks from visitors, okay? So it's not going to be all inclusive of folks from both of these sections of your database. You're working with one or the other 90% of the time, and for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to be working from the members module. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up here. All of the things that we are talking about for our session here today is going to be a function of using this find button up here at the top of the screen. So when you're doing finds here in the members or visitors modules, you're always going to be generating one of these grids, but you may not always see it. So using this find, most of the time when you are doing this, you'll click on your find button at the top, which I'll do now. When I click that, you'll notice everything on your screen goes blank, and now you can search for whatever you choose to. The cursor by default is going to be sitting right over here by the name field. So that's the default search you're going to be doing when you click in there, when you click that find button. So from here, and you start typing in usually somebody's last name. As you type, you'll see your list on the grid down below there is going to be populating as you go. If you see the person's name who you are looking for on this list, you don't have to keep typing. You can just use the arrow keys on your keyboard to select a person and press the Enter key on your keyboard. When you do that, it locks that person's name in here in the name field. Then all you have to do is either press the Enter key again or click the Go button, which will be listed right here next to the Find button at the top of the screen. Once you're kind of getting better at the program a little bit here, you're usually just going to hit the Enter key again, and it'll make that search happen, and it'll take you to that person's record. Anytime you do a search for anybody, that's normally what you're doing. You're doing a search for a particular person's name. But that's not always what you're doing on here. You can search by any bit of criteria you choose to on this screen. So as an example, if I click on my Find button, let's say I wanted to get a list of all of the folks in my database who are my active members here in my member file. So in that example, I will be using the status field, which is located right here, which is the field designed to keep track of membership status with church windows. Because the status field is what's called a list field, which are all of these fields with these little gray down arrows. If I click on my down arrow here, it gives me a list of all of my valid codes for that field. So I want to go look for all of my active members, so I can select that on my grid, click on my Select Item to Find button at the bottom of this window. You'll see the field populate with that code. Then you can press your Go button here. And that takes us to our first view of our grid. So what you're looking at when this screen pops up here is a table of information from the membership module. So these are all of the folks who are coded as active member in our database here. So for example, if I select one of these lines, I'll select the line on the top. So mailing label will be Susan Smith. There's the address, the city, state, zip code, etc. I want you to notice that there's a first name field and a last name field that will tell you the actual person that you are looking at. There's usually going to be a scroll bar at the bottom of the screen where you can see that there is going to be more information than you originally see. Our grid here has been limited already. And I'm going to show you how to edit what information is available on this grid here in just a moment. From this window as a general usable tool, if I want to go check out Susan Smith's record, I highlight her line on this screen here, and I use the Go To button at the top of the window. So there's the Go To button right up here. And if I want to go to her record over there in membership, I just click that button and it will take me right to her record. So here is Susan Smith's record in the database. I want you to notice, if some of you may have and some of you may not have, that there is a new button that's available at the top of the window here. This little button right up here is the button that takes you back to the grid you were just looking at. So this allows you to flip back and forth from this screen here back to the last grid that you generated. If I click on this button, it takes me right back to my grid again. If I wanted to go take a look at Dorothy Arnold's record, I can just highlight this line right here, click on my Go To button, and now it will take me to her record. So that is a way to easily flip back and forth between the grid and the individual records here, in this case in the membership module. Okay, so I want to spend a moment here talking about some of the other types of searches you can do to generate the grids. One that we always like to point out to folks is how to locate all of your folks that have a what's called a reason for termination on their record. That reason for termination field right there is a field that if you code somebody's record and you give them a reason for termination, what starts happening is that that person's name no longer shows up on any of your reports or any of your active searches. And the only way to get a list of those folks with a reason for termination is to specifically tell the program that you are looking for them. So in order to generate a grid with a list of all of the names of folks who have a reason for termination, you would click your Find button. And instead of selecting an individual code the way I did for status, you can also, in that field, put an asterisk in there. So if you put an asterisk in there, what you're telling the program is, I don't care what information is here on this field. I want to see everybody with anything under the reason for termination field. So when I click go, it's going to take me to a new grid, and these are only folks with a particular reason for termination. So for example, if I select, let's select Dan Kolst here. Notice the mailing label says Mrs. Ann Kolst. That's the household, but the actual individual person we're talking about in this case is Dan Kolst. So if I click on Go To, there's Dan's record. He's listed as deceased, and if you look here in the reason for termination field, you're going to see that his reason for termination is listed as a 5 code or death. That works for any field that you want to use that asterisk for. Quick example for that. Let's say you wanted to generate a grid with everybody with an email address on their record. I want to see everybody who I've got an email address for. So if you do your find, go to the email address field, put an asterisk in there and click go. It does the same thing. Here's all of our folks with an email address on their record. But I just realized it's not actually showing it on our screen. Let's put a pin in that. I want to show you how to edit the things on your grid in just a moment. I don't want to skip ahead too far here. The other thing that you can do when you're doing searches is you can search for more than one code in a list field, or for example, a range of dates if it's a date field. So the example that we have in our book here, we've got our mailing code field over here on the household record over here on the left. That is a field that we commonly use to keep track of what types of mailings, whether it's newsletters or any of the other mailings from the church, which households those mailings are going to go to. So if we wanted to send a mailing, for example, that goes to everybody who receives all of our mailings, as well as our out of town folks, we could do a search for everybody with an A or B code on their record using the colon or the little character with the 2 dots there. So if I click on find, I come here to mailing code. I can just type in here. I can go A colon B, and this is going to be a list of everybody with an A or B for the mailing code. And actually, this one actually doesn't. The grid does include our mailing code in this case. So you'll see everybody on the grid here has an A code, and we've got an out-of-towner listed here for Mr. and Mrs. Ed Berry. That also works if you're searching for a range of dates, which you can do, for example, using birth date. Well, let's do birth date. Let's say I want to find everybody born in the 1970s for whatever reason. The date fields in membership are 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and 4-digit year fields. So if you wanted to do a range of birth dates, you would go January 1st, which would be 01/01/1970, and then a colon. Oops, that's a semicolon. Then put a colon there through December 31st, 1979. So it's everybody born in the 70s. When you click go, it'll take you to that grid of those folks. The other thing I want to point out in terms of searches is you can combine criteria. Let's say I wanted to see a list of everybody born in the 70s who are also active members of our church. Okay, so you can combine 2 different bits of criteria to generate a grid by going to find. If I come down here to birth date, I'll do my search again, January 1st, 1970, colon, December 31st, 1979. So that has to be true. Then I'm going to come up here to status, and they also must be an active member. So both of those things have to be true. When I click go, that's those folks. Okay, so it combines those two things. When you're looking at the grid, you can see what you did your search on by clicking on this criteria button up in the upper left-hand corner. Right here, that button right there will tell you how many folks met the criteria, as well as what your original search was. Right there it is. Criteria status is equal to 1 and birth date between these dates. Okay. All right. Let's skip to editing what you're seeing on our grid here. The search I just did combines status as well as birth date, but we don't have those fields appearing on our grid right now. So to edit the information that you see on this grid, there is an options button at the top of this grid when you generate it, right here, this options button right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. Good. That takes you here to our member grid options window, where you've got the two sections on here. The section on the right side of the screen is this fields that are actually currently displaying on the member grid. And if you look at the grid at the top here, you'll see mailing label is listed first. You'll see geographic area is listed second, etc. So that shows you exactly how your grid is going to be formatted. So you can control what appears on your grid as well as what order it appears in. So what I'd like to do is make my first name field and my last name field be the first two things I see when I'm looking at my grid. So I'm going to take my first name field and I'm going to use these order buttons over to the right, and I'm going to move that first name field up to the top of my list. I'm going to take last name. I'm going to move that up there so that's listed right after first name. I also want to now include my status field as well as my birth date field. That's what the section over on the left is for. Here's all of your household family fields. Here's all of your individual fields listed below here. So I'm going to go ahead and add status and birth date. They're both individual fields. So I'm going to start with birth date. I can click on my add button here to add it to my list of fields that are displaying on my grid. Notice it appeared right here where my cursor was under fields to display. So I'm going to go add status, and you'll see it's going to appear right here underneath birth date because that's where my little pointer is on my grid here. So I'm going to go down to status, select that, click add, and you'll see it plop here right underneath birth date. If you put a check mark here where it says save as default, then every time you generate a grid in membership, it's going to appear in this same order and with the same fields in it. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and it's going to rebuild my grid, showing me first name, last name, birth date, and status here. Okay. Notice that it is not sorted alphabetically by name, but it is sorted by birth date, by month. So you'll see your March, April, May, June, etc. on the sort order here. You can also change the order that records appear on the grid but under that options window as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go back there, go to my sort tab, and notice here on the right side where it says fields to sort right there, it is sorting by birthday right now. So if I wanted that sorted alphabetically by last name instead, what I'll do is I'll get rid of birth date. And I'm going to come over here to member individual fields, and I'm going to find last name, select that and add that. Then I'm going to find first name, and that'll be my second field I sort by. So if there's 3 Smiths, it's going to go Aaron Smith before it'll go Tom Smith, for example. So it sorts by last name first on the grid. So when I click OK, it's going to rebuild my grid now, sorted alphabetically by last name. Okay. Let's see. We run very short on this topic because it is such a large topic, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the data entry options that you have, as well as how you can print a report from here. So Um, let's go ahead. I want to show you one other trick that you can do, and that is to generate a grid of everybody that does not have a reason for termination on their record here in membership. So if I just click find, do not enter any search criteria at all, and then click on my go button. Now what I'm going to be looking at is a grid with everybody in my member file without a reason for termination. I want you to notice that it's 83 records up here in the upper right hand corner. It tells us how many are on the grid right there. A cool trick here is that you can actually sort this grid however you see fit. So let's say and you don't have to go to that options window to do it. Let's say I wanted to sort this grid by status. I want a list of everybody here on my grid that does not have a status code on their record. I can right click on status. And if I select sort ascending, it starts at the low end and gets larger. And the lowest thing possible are the blanks. So that this puts all the blanks up at the top. So here's all of the records we have that don't have a status code on their record at this time. So there's a couple of things you can do, and this is really the last thing I have time to cover, unfortunately. You can get a list of these folks, and you can edit records right here from the grid. Let's say we wanted to print a list of all of these folks without a status code on their record. You can tag a block of records and print a report based on that. Normally, when you click on a record, it highlights a single line. And as you click around on here, it only selects that one field. If you want to select a couple of different records on here, you can hold the Control key down on your keyboard, and it will tag individual records as you go. If I were to let go of my Control key now and click on another record, I lose my work. So you have to make sure if you're tagging individual records, you're selecting them in that way. You can get a block of records by holding down the Shift key on your keyboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this record, Tripman Wilson, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and click on the top record, and it tags that entire block. I can now print a record for all of my people that I don't have a status code for by clicking on the Print button at the top. When I click on Print, it gives me my normal reporting options from the membership module. And I'm just going to go ahead and do all of the different formats, directory, export formats, etc., etc. I'm going to do a basic report. And here's a ton of these that are here because we do these training classes on here and save all these different things. But I'm going to do a basic columnar report, which is the one that's built into the system. And if I click on Print, it'll give me that list of those names. So here we are, 2 pages. That's all those folks who I don't have a status code for. One quick last thing, and I'm running long as I kind of knew I would. I apologize about that. Is that you can do data entry right here from this screen. So let's say you wanted to quickly kind of edit some records on here. Instead of going individually, let's say I want to select Keith. I click Go To the way we already learned. Oh, I made some changes to the way my grid is, so I'm going to just say yes to save my changes. There's Keith's record. Again, you'll notice that his status code is here. I could come in here, give him a code, select it for the field, click on Save, and do it in that way, and go back to my grid, and then go back and forth. Notice he doesn't show up on here anymore because he now has a code on his record. You can also type directly into a field on the grid. So this is a way to enter data here that can save you a lot of time. Okay. So I could go down my list. He's an associate member. Hit my down arrow on my keyboard. He's an active member. And as I go, these codes are automatically saved to these records. So that works for any field here in on the grid. I could change names like this. I can change addresses like this, and you don't have to go to individual records. The thing you want to be careful of, though, is that changes that you make here on the grid are saved automatically without having to click on a save button. Okay, so once I type it in, it is there already. So if I come here to Martin Jones's record and I click Go To, you'll notice that over here under Status, that active member is automatically saved here. So that's the grid. It's a powerful reporting tool and a powerful data entry tool. And I've gone over time as I kind of had a hunch I might. So that's all the time I've got to provide today on that topic. So thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're all set to go, feel free to go ahead and click on the X in the upper right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar control panel. That'll take you out of the webinar. For folks who are leaving, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a lovely afternoon. So